All right, three, two, fun. We're in another
Hey.
episode of a podcast. Your host Stephen Maxted here, and today we have Jenny Sacco back with Coffee with Genny B. And Jenny, before we dive in here, we kind of met virtually initially, and we've been chatting a bit. You run a podcast.
hmm
I've had a couple other folks on that run podcasts. I think this is one of the coolest interactions that we can kind of have between businesses because it's that is kind of this business, even though it's kind of just getting people's word out there and stuff. Yeah, great to have you on the show. And I'm not drinking coffee today, but I am having an espresso while we were chit chatting before getting on, and it's great to have you on here today.
Well, thank you. It's great to be on here, Stephen, and I'm glad that you gave me the opportunity to come on and talk about coffee and everything podcast related.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, excited to do it. I'm a big fan of coffee myself, and hopefully we have more people on to chat different parts of the coffee industry as we get talking business. And excited
hmm
to hear. I mean, you're at a very different stage, in my opinion, of podcasting than I am. I'm still early on in the journey, and you're over 100 episodes. I think we just said before 122 now
Yes.
that you're at, and that's very impressive. I know how much work that takes to do 40, or maybe we're at 43, I think, with you, and that's a lot of work. So kudos to you for taking that on and tackling the coffee scene, as it were. And is it mostly a focus? I know that we have some. Actually, I just noticing here too. There's some overlap on coffee and coffee related folks that we have
hmm
had on. Is it mostly Winnipeg focused, or are you reaching outside of Manitoba with some of your guests that you're having on in the coffee industry?
Well, it's a good question, Stephen. Initially, when I started the podcast, I had no intention of actually interviewing anybody. It was just going to be me talking, and then I was. It's interesting you mentioned about espresso because one of my early episodes was talking about espresso. So it's espresso versus espresso. And even my husband, who's Italian, calls it espresso. And it's like, no, it's not espresso, it's espresso. But the confusion comes because when you're brewing espresso, you express the coffee. So sometimes, that's the confusion. But anyway, I
Right.
digress. There's Terry out of Prairie Lily Coffee Roasters in Lloydminster, Saskatchewan. And Terry was one of the first ones who followed my Facebook group. So I have a Winnipeg Coffee Community Facebook group. And so he was following me on there. And after I did my episode about the espresso one, he sent me a message on Instagram and saying, "Oh, hey, I loved your episode, but if you want to know more about espresso, let me know." And then I don't know what made me think of this. And I said, "Well, hey, why don't I interview you for my podcast?" And he said, "Okay." And he came on my podcast, and it was such a wonderful interview because he is so knowledgeable about coffee and roasting and espresso, of course. But if you get a chance to listen to his episode, and it really, I learned a lot. I learned a lot from what he had to share. And so, yes, so he's the only one outside of Manitoba that I've interviewed. But that's not to say that I wouldn't be interested in interviewing
Yeah.
somebody from anywhere, because when you're doing it on the digital platform, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. So that's
Yeah.
that's a goal, is I want to
Awesome.
start interviewing more. There's
Yeah.
a number of coffee roasters, all across Canada that I would want to get in touch with.
Totally. And I'm just kind of like referencing, as I always do live, we'll call it research. We don't have a third person over here to help do this. I have taken a review through here, and it looks like, I mean, and it's great. You kind of have like a mix of your own episodes, and I'd already kind of like seen this before too, but and then you have other folks that are roasting their own coffee or are
Yeah.
in, like, we have chocolate in here, and then we have some other businesses. It looks like just kind of like mixed in here, and I mean, really well put together. And
Thank you.
but how did this get started for you though too? Let's go back to like day one of, like, thinking of the idea, and then you get into coffee. We warmed this up, and then I was like, we got to get recording. This is good stuff. We're gonna say it twice in a row. But what was the starting point for you there?
Well, it's interesting, and we did talk about a little bit before we recorded this, but I was turning 60 in 2019, and my husband was saying, "So what do you want to do for your birthday? Do you want to travel? Do you want to have a party? Like, what do you want to do?" And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what I want to do." And then just out of the blue, this idea popped in my head. What if I do 60 days of 60 coffees? Now, I have absolutely no idea where that came from. I didn't hear or read about it anywhere. And so I thought, okay, so if I'm going to do this, I needed to do a little bit of research. So back then I'm like, okay, are there 60 coffee shops that I can visit? And so I started, mapping it out and figuring out, where the coffee shops were and which one I was going to go to first. And then I was going to do this on my personal Instagram account, which is Jenny Sakovac. And so then, of course, my first stop was Starbucks because I was a barista for 4 years working for
Very cool.
Starbucks. I started when it was at the Academy location, which of course is Empty Cup now. And then I
Okay.
went
Yeah,
to
yeah.
the Ellis location, which is closer to my home. And yeah, I worked for 4 years. I did 20 hours a week, plus working full time. But when you have a passion for something, you make it work. And so I made it work.
Yeah.
And so, of course, that Starbucks was my first location. And then I went to Second Cup and I'm like, okay, got the chains out of the way. Now we can focus on local. And that's what I did is I visited every single day, even on Christmas Day, because most coffee shops are open or closed. I found a coffee shop on Notre Dame. It's Altoa Noor, and they're Middle Eastern food. And I had Turkish coffee. And
Oh,
then
very cool.
Christmas Eve, we were at my brother and sister-in-law's place for Christmas. We're driving home, and I said to my husband, I don't have a coffee shop today. We have to stop somewhere. So we're going down Corridon, and there's Eva's Gelato. I'm like, okay, we have to pull in. I have to go in. I have to do my coffee thing. So I went into Eva's. I got my coffee, did my spiel, and so for me, it's like I had to do a different one every single day. And sometimes I veered off. So for instance, I remember I was driving down Ellis and I was turning onto Gary Street. I was going to head to East Kildonan. I was going to go to the Krusty Bun
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
in East
good.
Kildonan.
Wow. Yeah, yeah.
But as I turned the corner and I'm stopped because there's a red light, I happened to glance over to my left and I saw this coffee shop called Gary Street Coffee. And so I
Hmm.
quickly changed my mind and I zipped over into the park, into the back lane, and I popped in. And so that was my on the spot coffee thing. Because sometimes, you can put together a plan, but then sometimes you have to, fly by the seat of your pants and think, okay, I've got this opportunity. Let's do it. So then I did my 60 days and so my birthday is December 31st. So my 60th day was Little Sister on River on my birthday. And then I love the experience so much. I'm like, I want to do something more. And I was thinking I
Cool.
will do a rural tour. So January, got my Coffee with Genny B Instagram account, my email. I got the rights to the name, coffeewithjennyb.ca. I had it
Yep.
all set to go, and then COVID hit. And it's like,
Right.
okay, can't do anything, can't go anywhere. But I remember I was shopping at Staples later that year, and of course, you remember what it was like during COVID, like very sparse, and Anyway, I was walking by, and there was a microphone sitting on a shelf. Just that's all that was on the shelf. And I walked by, I
Yeah.
saw it, and I'm like, interesting. I went to leave the store, and for whatever reason, I went back and I bought it. And I remember I
Cool.
spent, I think it was $170 for this microphone, thinking, what the heck am I going to do with this? I can't do anything. So it sat and I did nothing with it. And then I thought, well, I should actually do something with it. And so it was early 2021 where I was working with a coach who said, so what do you want to do with your Coffee with Jenny B business? Like, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to do a podcast. She told me who did her podcast. I called them. Now, I'm someone who, when I want to buy a purse, I will research different purses. I will try to find the one that is the best deal, get it on sale. When they told me how much it would cost to do the podcast, I didn't blink an eye. I said, I'm in. And I won't tell you how much it was, but it's more than a purse.
That's awesome.
And I said,
Yeah.
I'm in. And I thought to myself, I don't know how I'm going to get the money, but I'm going to make it
Yeah.
happen. And that was the
Cool.
start.
Awesome. Well, I have one thought there, and I don't mean to have kind of like a gap and segueing things together, but when you were saying the 60 days of coffee, and that was one of the openers before, I didn't think about this, but as you were saying, you're going to these different places and testing it. Are you familiar with Dave Portnoy at all? With his like pizza testing? He has like one bite of a pizza from different shops. He's kind of infamous online for Barstool
Oh,
Sports.
yes.
Anyways, I know that it's very different genres of life here kind of in this mentioning, but when you were saying that, I'm like, oh, I could just imagine you being like, okay, 7.5, mentally doing like a note because he does a rating for them. I don't know if you did that on your taste testing at all, but it would have been interesting. Maybe you can do it in the future if you didn't do it on that one.
You know what? I didn't, and actually, my son, whose name is also Stephen, but his
Oh,
his is
there you
spelled
go.
PH.
Ah, the pH, yes.
My son Stephen actually said, Mom, you should rate it and rate it on the number of beans,
Oh,
right?
how many beans is
Yeah,
this one,
so,
right?
so 2 out of 5
Yeah.
beans, for instance, or what have you.
Yeah, for
You would
sure.
rate
Or
it.
like a 2.1, 3.2, whatever it ends up being,
Yeah,
kind of on a
and
mental note there for you to
and then I've got my
trigger.
criteria, it's like the
Yeah.
aroma, the taste, the presentation, all of
Yep.
that. I mean, yeah, I'd be happy to do that and, wait until obviously 2024 when it's nicer for me to go out and do it. But
For
and then I
sure.
could be maybe like a secret coffee taster.
Guru shopper. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's that guy's whole thing. I think it could be very easily integrated. I hadn't thought of it before we hopped in. We're doing it live now, but
Yeah,
that is a very cool story about how you got started, and then you now you get into doing podcasts with just a pure passion for coffee. And have
yeah,
you always been a avid coffee goer,
always,
drinker? It wasn't just
always.
the 60 and 60 thing. It was
No,
cool.
in fact, I remember when there was A&W on Notre Dame, and I was going to in high school. So I went to a local high school, Daniel Mac, and I remember that we would skip classes or lunchtime or whatever, and we'd head over to A&W, and we'd order black coffee. And do you remember those curly fries?
Oh yeah.
We would get curly fries with seasoning salt. So we'd have curly fries with seasoning salt and drink black coffee, and we would smoke, and we thought we were so cool sitting in the back booth, and you know, and and so then I graduated from, drinking A&W coffee to when I went to Red River College, I was in the Creecom program.
Oh
And
cool.
there, this is going to sound terrible, but there's a restaurant called the Buffalo, and
Okay.
we used to call it the Barfalo because the food was so bad back then. But I would drink coffee, right? Whatever
Yep.
coffee was available at Red River College, and then after when I started working, it was, drinking whatever coffee was available at the place where I was working because back
Okay.
then there weren't a lot of coffee shops, and they were like the diners, like there used to be the Wagon Wheel Diner on Hargrave. So you used to go to these diners and they have like the big white mugs, and here's your coffee that's been sitting on the
That
brewery
is
for like hours, you know.
yep.
And but that's what you drank, and that's what you got used to drinking.
Awesome. I
Yeah.
can just picture that too. As soon as you said the diner thing, and we were just very often we're just traveling. We went to an actual like mocked up, keeping the stereotype kind of look going to it as a diner in Nashville, and they had the big white mugs with everything there, and very on brand. It's funny that I have that visual top of mind there. And then what kind of happened from your end of things when you're just like kind of we'll call it like a little bit of a history lesson in some ways because you're experiencing coffee over the years and you've seen the industry change. What did
Mhm.
you notice to kind of evolve from that next? Because I'm assuming at some point in that like storyline, Tim Hortons comes up on radar. I don't know if they were like kind of like the next jump in that series of things or if that was quite a bit later on.
That was
But
Starbucks.
Starbucks first?
Yeah, when I discovered
Interesting.
Starbucks, I'm like, "Oh my god," right? "Oh my god," I thought,
Yeah.
I'm in coffee heaven," because
Okay.
when Starbucks first arrived on the scene, they just opened up that whole idea of coffee being more. Now, do you know
Right.
why Starbucks became Starbucks?
I feel like I have heard this, but it's not a story that's avid in my mind. Someone asked me something earlier today, and I don't know why I feel off, but I would like to hear it again.
Okay,
If I have
so
heard it, I'll be patient and listen to the whole thing.
the reason Starbucks became Starbucks is because they wanted to create that 3rd place. So 1st place is home. That's where you get your coffee. 2nd
Yeah,
place is work, school, some other place. So home,
right,
work, school, coffee. But Starbucks wanted to create this 3rd place, this idea where you could go and you could sit in, big easy chairs and listen to music and
right.
drink coffee and have, eat food. and relax, and you could sit there for hours, and you could do your homework, do your schoolwork, do whatever, have conversations with friends, and don't feel that you are rushed. And so they wanted people to come in and feel that sense of community, that sense of customer service, so that they knew your name. They put your name on your cup.
Right.
They
Yes.
remembered your drink. They would say, so for instance, when I was working as a barista, even today, I will see people out in the street, and I will say, oh, she was a tall, non-fat latte, or he's a, triple espresso, or, what have you, because I remember when I was
And
working on the bar, and that's
yep.
what we called it, working on the bar. And so when I was working on the bar, if you ordered a cappuccino, like, just a straight old cappuccino, which is, foam and steamed milk, and then of course the espresso, I would still say, "Hey, what did you think?" But if you ordered a dry cappuccino, which is just foam, I don't know why somebody would want just foam and espresso, but that's it. If you ordered something extra special, I would say, "Stephen, can you take a sip and let me know if that works for you?" And you might take a sip and go, "Oh yeah, that's great. Perfect." Or you might say, "It's not quite what I wanted. Here, let me make it for you again." And so making
Right.
you another drink. So that was the experience with Starbucks, is the customer service, is the sense of
Right.
community, is the sense of, coming in and feeling welcomed and valued. And so that was my
Very cool.
experience with Starbucks. And that was part of the reason why I wanted to be a barista, because I wanted to learn more about, you know, coffee, and where coffee came from, and how to make all the different drinks, and so on and so forth. But and
Yeah.
then of course Tim Hortons came in, and then McDonald's, and now everybody has coffee, and everybody says, oh, 100% Arabica beans. Yes, of course. And local coffee shops also use Arabica beans, but what are you doing with your beans? And so part of my experience with the 60 days of 60 coffees, and doing my podcast, is it also opened up the idea that Winnipeg had such a diverse coffee scene, and not just Winnipeg, but Manitoba as well. But it's learning the stories about the different coffee roasters, either going directly to the farms or working through a distributor, but they know
Yep.
who the farmers are. And so part of what I want to share in terms of education is, it's not just the two, three, four, $5 cup of coffee. What you are doing with your cup of coffee is you're supporting a farm in Rwanda. You're supporting a community. They're building a school. They're building an orphanage. They're supporting the families in that community with their coffee farm. And it's just wanting people to understand that it's more than just that. It's all of that, and you have a role to play in terms of supporting all the different farms out there, because without the farms providing coffee, you won't have your coffee.
100%. And
Yeah.
sorry, if you look my eyes, like I said, I am just like Googling. I was curious to see what year Starbucks actually started. And so my apologies for lo- losing for a second there, but it was March 30th, 1971, just for reference.
Yeah.
You probably knew that. Maybe there was
Yeah.
like a test there, but then there's also like the other ones that are listed underneath here just for reference too. Dunkin' is 1948, and then it has McDonald's obviously a bit of a different story there, but
Yeah.
they were in 1955. When did so Starbucks was first, and then because Tim Hortons was originally a donut shop,
Yeah. It was
and then
just
they
a
got into and they started in 1964. So interestingly enough, some started before that, probably as more like restaurants, but then basically the 70s is when things start to really go
Mhm.
coffee oriented. Huh.
Well, and part of that was because when you think about the 50s and 60s, it was like nobody thought that, I'm not going to pay to go drink coffee
Right.
somewhere. And the only
Yeah.
reason you're going to do that is there has to be a reason for you to have coffee. Otherwise, and I remember my dad, growing up, we had Sanka,
What's that?
instant coffee.
Oh, okay.
Sanka, orange, ye, instant.
Yeah.
Um, and don't get me started on decaf. I know, I know. I Stone City Coffee Roasters, Colleen said, I want you to try my decaf Brazil coffee. You won't be able to tell it's decaf. I can tell it's decaf. I can tell.
Interesting.
I, I don't
That's
know how.
funny you say that. I don't really like decaf either, but I can some people have a hard time sleeping after the caffeine and stuff. I don't seem to have that. I think it's a little bit of the
Me
ADD
neither.
also. Doesn't hit me the same, but other people are like, how can you drink that at this hour? And I'm like, I can literally have coffee like probably half hour before bed. I don't know if it's necessarily healthy for me, but I could do it if I wanted to. And if I'm up later, I need a coffee to kind of perk me up or whatever. I'm like, I'll have a coffee, and then doesn't seem to. What? Yeah. Well, I guess that's more on the person. That's not probably a good question for on the podcast today about that
Yeah.
side of things. But I think you got to go. Where's on the map that you want to go check out as far as farms? I think that's something if you haven't started to explore it, like you got to just go
Yeah.
hop on a plane. Like we can't grow it here, and it's pretty
No.
cool. As I mentioned before, like I hit up a tour in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
I did a tour there, and then that's what, well, the chocolate I was snacking on before here, the midday squares. The only reason I kind of Googled them in 2020 or was looking for chocolate things is because I went for a combination of like a chocolate tour and a coffee tour, and it was just
Mhm.
such a neat mix of seeing the process and
Yeah.
understanding that a little bit more. But yeah, where's on the list for you? What's of top of the list to go
Costa
check
Rica.
out coffee? Costa Rica,
Oh my
yeah.
gosh, Costa
Okay,
Rica.
well then we'll chat
Mm,
more after this for sure.
yeah,
I'll have
because
to send you where I went to.
because when I was working at Starbucks, and at that time, I don't believe they're offering it now, but at that time, if you were management, so if you were a store manager, assistant manager, and I believe if you were also a shift supervisor, you had an opportunity that
Because
you could, I don't know if you could win a trip or you got a trip, but you could go to the Starbucks farm in Costa Rica. And I thought, oh,
yeah,
that would be so great to do that. And then it never happened, but it's always been in the back of my mind. I would love to go to Costa Rica. And you know what's
yeah.
interesting is a friend of mine, Erica Miller, she and I worked together as baristas at Starbucks back in the day. And I ran into her. Actually, she's now teaching with me at University of Winnipeg Pace. And we were just chatting one day over coffee. And I was telling her about Costa Rica. And she's like, well, I've been to Costa Rica and I know all the context. So if you ever want to go, you let me know and I'll line you up. And it's like, all right,
100%.
I'm going
Yeah.
to definitely do that.
Yeah. Well, it's neat that you say that because I didn't go on the farm, but I did see signs there that were like Starbucks farm or yeah, Starbucks coffee farms like back in the hills on a couple of little spots that you saw. I didn't go to those ones there, but it's very interesting. So yeah,
Yeah.
if we don't want to talk immediately after about this, but I will probably be sending you photos of that experience, and it's
I'd
I
love
think
to
you got
see
to do
that.
it. Well, you got to take some mics on the road with you and go down there.
Oh, yes,
For
absolutely.
sure. You got to record some stuff when you're down there on your end of things.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
next on the list is Mexico. Yeah,
Okay.
so Costa Rica first, then Mexico. I'd love to go to Ethiopia because
Yeah.
I really do enjoy Ethiopian coffee. And there's a
Oh,
number of, and believe it or not, there's a number of different roasters who specifically feature Ethiopian coffee. But even though they're getting the beans from the same area, what they're doing with their roast is a little different.
yeah.
So there's Nagash in Niverville. There's a new coffee roasters
Yes.
called Lila's.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, there's one more that features Ethiopian. But then DeLuca's does their own version of Ethiopian coffee. So all the roasters have that in their mix. And back to Starbucks for a second, their Ethiopian coffee, which of course they don't carry anymore, but that was when I first tried Ethiopian coffee. And I'm like, oh my gosh, because it has those bright citrus notes. And I love dark roast. I'm a big dark roast fan. But the best way of enjoying Ethiopian coffee is actually medium roast, believe it or not.
I was just going to inquire about this as you were headed down this path. I'm like, I wonder which one is your favorite and kind of why, but I think you just explained that very well on here. Do you have kind of like a tier in your mind? It sounds like you've had way more different kinds of coffees than I do typically like a dark or a medium
Mhm.
roast. And after learning a little bit more about it on those tours, it was pretty insightful to
You know,
understand that more. But
yeah. For me, again, I prefer a dark roast, but I would never turn my nose up at anything other than decaf. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
yeah, right.
You know,
The digs at decaf, it's not real coffee.
no, no, it's not real. Just pretend
Yeah,
coffee. Um,
yeah.
at Starbucks, actually, their coffee from Sumatra. So it's a Sumatra, so Indonesia.
Okay.
And that was probably that and French roast were the two that I never liked at Starbucks because Sumatra to me tastes like dirt. And I just like, wow, this is terrible. Even it doesn't matter how much cream and sugar I put in there, it was just terrible. And then one of my favorite coffee shops, and I'm going to mention it, Colosimo's. So the
Okay.
first
Cool.
time that I met Jay, it was at his coffee shop on Provence, and I was saying that, I didn't like, because he has his coffee's Coffee Dante. So Dante is his son. So he named the coffee after his son. And he said that the coffee's from Indonesia. And I'm like, oh no, oh no, it's terrible. He says, no, no, no,
We have a red
try
flag on the play here. Yeah, I've had those coffees. I'm not going to go for it.
it. You can't
Sorry.
trick me.
Yeah,
And so he says, no, 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 try it. And I tried it. So of course, for your viewers and listeners, when you are
yeah,
trying coffee for the first time, drink it black. Don't add cream and sugar, because cream and sugar will change the consistency and the taste of the coffee. You want to try it black. You want to take a little bit of a sip. You want to let it sit on your tongue. You want to get all those sensations and determine what those tasting notes are. Speaking of tasting notes, I'm just going to digress for a second. When it says on
sure.
the back or the coffee bag of coffee, and if it says, chocolate and nuts and wine, there's no
Yep.
chocolate, there's no nuts, there's no wine in there. It's the idea of this is what
Yes.
you're going to be tasting on your tongue. And you and I could be
Yeah,
tasting the same coffee. I will love it and you will hate it. It just depends on preference. But
for sure.
anyway, try it black. So I try to sip and I'm like, oh, this is really nice. And so now that is one of my favorites, is whenever I go to Closimo's, it doesn't matter what he's got, I'm going to have the coffee Dante, because
Interesting.
that coffee from Indonesia, the way that that is roasted, makes
Yeah,
it enjoyable for me.
that is a neat story. Do you ever when you're at a restaurants and stuff like that, do you ever try something that you've traditionally not liked or you just have never had before? Just to
Sometimes,
test the
depending.
waters out? Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a neat thing
yeah.
to try to do and like kind of go in with no expectations, especially at a different restaurant. You're like, I'm gonna try this today. And I would just the way you're describing that coffee experience, once in a while I do that, and it's usually it has been fun.
Mhm.
A couple times it's been like, no, you actually don't like this.
Right.
This is a for sure thing, but it's neat to test the taste buds out because things change over time,
Mhm.
for
They
sure. I know
definitely
I used
do.
to say that with the yeah, certain foods and just the way you're describing this here. You're like a coffee sommelier of sorts. I don't, is there a name for that
Um,
in coffee world?
that's a good question. I don't think it's a sommelier. I think maybe it's a coffee master, as you're looking it up, so you can let
I
me
am,
know.
yeah. Coffee
And
expert name. Well, they just
yeah,
actually listed
and here's
the
a fun fact that I don't know if a lot of people know this, but the taste is actually in the aroma. You're
that makes
smelling the
sense.
coffee
Your smell.
first, and
Yeah,
the smell of the coffee. So, I mean, that's one of the top 5, I would think, identifiable smells in the world. The aroma is the smell of coffee brewing. And so when you smell that coffee brewing, when you smell the coffee, you're even before you take that first sip,
that's
you're imagining what that's going to taste like. So you have the aroma, you take that sip, and either the sip reinforces the idea that the aroma that it's going to be a delicious cup of coffee, or the
yeah.
aroma has fooled you and it's like, oh my gosh, that coffee is terrible.
Right. Well, hopefully it's not that. You're definitely right. That is exactly what's happening. I mean, it's the when you ever see like a coffee marketing commercial, I think back to like Folgers. I remember years ago, that's just kind of like stapled in my brain as a kid and seeing that on like TV, right?
Yeah.
You see like this, I guess it is like the smell or the scent of coffee, but it's just the heat going off the top. But that is certainly very an accurate way to visually describe what's going on, like how to taste the coffee is it's that yeah, so and back to the thing that we were just chatting about here. So there was a few things that Google popped up, and if we're wrong, I could be wrong on this because I'm just doing this on the thing. But um, barista obviously is one of the
Yeah.
words described in here as a coffee expert. But then there's this one that sticks out to me. It's called, they describe it as a Q grader exam for a sommelier for coffee, basically. So you can be a coffee connoisseur and get this like Q grading, I guess,
Mhm.
somewhere in here. And keep in mind, listener, and for us, this has been a 30-second research project. So if this is wrong and someone calls us out on it, I'm not
Yeah.
hard and fast on this being accurate. But if that looks like it's basically you're a barista, and maybe there's like different designations to that behind the
Mhm.
scenes. We could look it up later. I was just curious, kind of it popped into
Yeah.
my head because I'm like maybe there is a name for it because if it is, then you definitely are that,
Well, trying to
or
be.
have the direction for it. Yeah, what
Yeah.
that's very cool, and I mean it's a big part of everyone's day routine in many cases. I don't know, and you prefer to drink coffee. I often have it in the morning and then just
Mhm.
after lunch or in the afternoon for me with the espresso shot.
Yep.
And recently got an espresso machine. And oh, how about this side of things in the coffee world? Do you ever, sure you have, this is a silly way to open that one. How do you prepare your coffee and stuff like that? Is there a certain way that you'll make it yourself or you prefer to have it made? Because I know there's like drip and
Yeah.
coffee maker or whatever
Well,
to go. So,
there's drip, there's pour over, there's AeroPress, there is French press. So there's different ways, and even with pour over, there's your typical pour over, and then there's a Chemex, which is a fancy kind of a beaker thing with different filters. I prefer just a drip coffee, and I
yeah,
like to grind my beans fresh before,
yeah.
I never buy a bag of coffee that is
Like
already
ground.
ground. I like the
Yep.
beans. I like to grind it, and I have my own system. So I have a container.
Oh,
So the idea for beans is that it should be opaque, meaning that it's not clear. You don't want light to come in. You want it to be cool. So you want to keep it in a cool place. So I keep my beans in the this canister, and then I have another canister. So when I grind my beans, I take the ground coffee and I put it in the other canister. So then when I go make my coffee in the
yeah.
morning, I have my coffee ready to go. So I like to have 1 scoop of coffee, ground coffee per cup of water. So 1 scoop. Actually, it's recommended 2 scoops of coffee per cup of water, which I think is a little strong.
Yeah.
But for me, 1 per 1 ratio is perfect. For my daughter, she likes it like half that. And so when she comes over to my place, it's like tons of cream, tons of sugar because
Right. Just
she
to
doesn't like
dilute
strong
it.
coffee. But
Right.
that's what I like to do is so I have my system in terms of coffee. And then occasionally, if I want to do an espresso, I have a mocha pot. Now, a mocha pot is not mocha like chocolate mocha, it's
Yeah.
MOKA, and it's one of those espresso pots that you put on the stovetop. And you can buy them anywhere. I mean, you can get them at Winners. Of course, DeLucas sells those, and they have the different sizes. And so you have your mocha pot on the stovetop. And
Yeah.
Italians, that's their coffee maker is the mocha pot. And so the
Okay.
idea is there's water in the bottom, and then there's the filter that has the ground coffee. And so as the
Yeah.
water is heated up, the hot water will go up through, and so then take the coffee, and so then the coffee is brewed into the canister, and so there's a hole in the middle, and so you can see the coffee kind of blurbing as it's, and then there's a little spout at the bottom that steams, so the steam comes out. And so that is how you make Italian espresso is the mocha pot on the stovetop. And then of course
Oh,
there's French press, which you have the beaker and there's different grinds. So French press is a more of a coarse grind because you don't want the grounds to come through your coffee when you're pressing it
right.
down. Espresso is super fine like sand. And
Hmm.
then for a drip coffee maker and a pour over, it's more of a medium grind. So there's different grinds and
Oh,
different ways of serving. Oh, and AeroPress is perfect because you can take it on the road. It's portable, it's easy. The little filter,
yeah.
so you put the
Yeah.
coffee in, press it down, ready to go.
Awesome. Okay. So well, your favorite was drip. And I
Yep.
am familiar with many of the other ones you listed off there. It's just
Mhm.
neat to hear you talk so fluently about them and that and such ease. You're like, oh,
Yeah,
this is how
yeah,
you do coffee. This is the grind that you'd be looking for within the bean. And I very agree with you on about the bean thing. I know once in a while I will get something that's ground up, but I prefer to get the bean. And I don't know if I like the authenticity of
it
it
is.
coming right, like the bean right to the grinder and then the grinder into the thing. It's like you're a little bit part of the in a weird
Yeah,
way, it's a bit of a stretch, but you're connected a little bit closer to that agricultural piece of it, maybe. I
you
don't know
are.
if that's what it is, but
No,
yeah,
absolutely. And the fresher the bean, the better, because
yeah,
all local coffee roasters will have on the back, it'll have a date, and that's the date that the coffee was roasted. So the
yep,
fresher the beans, the better the coffee. And of course, for the average person, they're not really going to know the difference, but for those that really like your coffee, you can really tell the difference. And here's something that there's I don't know, there's a little bit of controversy about this, but putting your beans in the freezer, and that's a no-no.
oh, yeah, I
No.
wouldn't think to do that, but I mean, why do some people do it? Is it supposed to
I
keep
guess,
freshness?
uh, I guess they're thinking that they're preserving the coffee by putting in the freezer, but the thing
Mm,
is that when you
not
leave
to
your
pull out.
coffee beans in the freezer, the oil, that's right, the oil,
Mm,
and that's where the flavor is in the oil on the beans, and
yeah,
people will put it in the freezer, take it out, put it back, take it out, And that's just defeating the whole purpose. And I mean, again, they probably won't notice the difference, but it definitely is. You're better off if
Yeah.
you buy your coffee, put it in a cool place. I have coffee that I have downstairs in the basement. It's in a cool place. When I want my coffee, I bring it up, and then, as I say, I put it in my opaque container, and I'm good to go. So, but you were talking about me in term of knowledge.
Yeah.
I want to be that person. I want to be that coffee expert that people turn to, and I get people doing that all the time. What's your favorite coffee shop? I'm going to be here. What do you think? So I get people asking me all the time, what do you recommend? And I have the answer. If I don't have the answer, I get the information for them. But I'd like to be known as the coffee expert. And when I see coffee shops that are opening up and I find out what they're serving as coffee, and I'm like, why? Why are you going to something commercial when there are so many coffee roasters here who would be happy to create a special blend just for you? All you have to do is ask.
I think you're gonna become a coffee consultant if you're not already kinda headed that way for
I'd
these
love to be.
companies. I could see that being the thing for sure. And
Yeah.
there's, I mean, I know we talked a little bit before this too, so we kinda covered, like, the starting point of the journey for you and a little bit of in detail, pardon me, around, the depth of knowledge that you do have on the coffee industry, which is just really awesome. And now you're 122 episodes in. What's kinda next? Is it a bigger goal there, or are you looking to partner with some coffee shops like you were just kind of mentioning, like, kind of being the glue in those situations and helping folks out that way? Or what does the future look like for your podcast and coffee journey besides getting down to Costa Rica immediately?
Immediately, yes.
Yeah,
Good question, Stephen. For my podcast, I took a bit of a pause right now, just because I'm teaching and I've got a couple of other projects that I want to work on, and I
yeah,
love I love doing the podcast. Don't get me wrong, I do. But my the 122nd episode actually talks about why I'm taking a bit of a pause.
okay,
My son and his girlfriend are having a baby this month. My granddaughter Lenny is 6, and she loves spending time with us, and I want to be able to spend more time with her. And as I said, I've got some projects to work on, and taking a pause sometimes is just taking a bit of a break, determine, like, is this the path, and
yeah,
where do I see myself? I mean, I'm not stopping my podcast. I in my podcast I referenced, there's a poet. His name is Taylor Olson, and he it was very apropos, because when I was thinking about taking that break, his email appeared in my inbox, and I read it, and it's like, this is not the end, where he talks about it's okay to take a break, it's okay to take a pause, take a breath, have that moment to determine, okay, so where do I go from here? Which is what your question is. Where do
yeah,
I go from here? Do I continue down this path? Do I change it a little bit? Do I do video and audio, not just audio, like what you're doing?
yeah,
So and I don't want to jump into anything and say this is what I'm doing without thinking about it and doing a little bit of research. So instead of doing something rash and then jumping in and then realizing, okay, that's not really what I wanted to do, taking that bit of a pause,
yeah,
giving me an opportunity to kind of think about where I want to go. And also, I would like to find a way of getting some sponsors to come on board and help me continue the education. Maybe not just doing the podcast, but also having opportunities where I'm visiting, different coffee shops and different roasters, and doing, live interviews at, like Harrison's, for instance, Al, the roaster at the Forks, so the junction, right,
yep,
where he has his big roaster, and he actually sells opportunities for you to come and watch and do some roasting yourself. There's other
very
coffee
cool.
makers, like Colosimo's on Henderson, his coffee shop. Jay's got a little micro roaster, so being able to do those kinds of things and
Right,
and really focus about the coffee roasters and the coffee shops, and really, so if there's someone out there that, wants to help promote me and help me promote them, I'm happy to do some partnerships, and maybe
awesome.
not just focus on Manitoba. There's so many different companies all across Canada, coffee roasters, that might be happy to want to partner with me.
Absolutely. Well, we did some manifesting on the episode on Monday. with Cheryl with Crank. We were talking actually about Starbucks, oddly enough, in a weird way, but we will manifest this too out there for a listener. And if anyone does have a great connection, we'll make sure to share this on the website and yeah, and make sure that we can, if we can help with that connection. It seems like you're doing yeah, really cool stuff in the coffee industry, but it definitely makes sense of taking a step back when you have that kind of family events happening
Yeah,
with little
yeah.
ones. It's that's very exciting for you. So, well, congrats on
Thank
that
you.
as you're going forward there. And um, yeah, I think that's awesome. Hopefully, we can, like I said, help push that out there and in these shorts that does hit the right ears or someone who knows the right ears on that front of things. And Jenny, was there anything else before we kind of head down the path of wrapping, or good way to find you, I guess? How do people get a hold of you?
Okay, so my website is coffeewithjennyb.ca. So it's Jenny with a G, so you can see my name spelled on the screen. You
Yep.
can find me on Instagram, Coffee with Jenny B. And if you want to check out the Winnipeg Coffee Community Group on Facebook, then I post a number of different things. So for instance, I was just doing a coffee advent calendar. I want to do a coffee tour in the spring. I'm doing a coffee pass. There's a lot of coffee things that I want to be doing. And so the way to find out about it is to find me on social. You can find me on LinkedIn as well and learn more about what's going on. And actually, if you want to check out my Coffee with Jenny B Instagram account, I'm going to be featuring the 24 different coffee roasters that are in my coffee advent calendar. So you can see the talent that's out there and the new coffee roasters that are popping up all the time. And so
Okay.
learning more about who they are and maybe deciding that you want to follow them and check out what they have to offer and be open-minded. Go and try something different, even something that you've never tried before, because you never know, it could be your next best favorite drink.
No, I think that's awesome. And you know what? I just pulled up the Instagram here for reference, and yeah, you do a great job of the branding and the sharing on here. And I think if folks do find you on there, Coffee with Jenny B, all together there, that's a great resource on top of the website. And yeah, really great page. I think
Thank you.
that's awesome here too. So, Jenny, it was great having coffee kind of with you today, or lots of coffee talk, and yeah, pleasure meeting you, and I look forward to staying in touch about your journey, and we look forward to sharing your story
Thank
on
you
our
so
podcast
much.
here. So
Yeah, no, this has been wonderful. I loved our conversation and yeah, you make it so easy to have that conversation. So thank you for that.
you're welcome. Well, we got two podcasters on here. Hopefully, we can put it
Hey.
together, right? So that's awesome. Okay, Jenny. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you later.
Super. Thanks, Stephen.